Hey everyone, Shamrocked here with another dungeon guide for you. So this is actually all three bosses for the Vortex Pinnacle. I've bookmarked the bosses as well, so if you just want to skip right ahead to one, you can check that out. So before we get started, just a quick overview. This dungeon has three bosses, and just the dungeon in general is a lot of fun. It's based on the wind elementals from Cataclysm, and the vibe of it is great. The whole feel, like it's just a very beautifully done dungeon. Anyway, so we have three bosses, Grand Vizier Ertan, Altairus, and Asaad. So the first boss I find pretty easy at this key level. So this is an 18, by the way. But I feel like this is going to be a very tricky boss on harder keys because the AoE damage that he does do when he goes into that like tornado phase is pretty intense, even on an 18. So I feel like once you scale really high, that's going to be tough to heal, which will be a lot of fun. Next boss is Altairus. This boss has been giving a lot of people issues since the season came out. That being said, it is doable. I do promise you that. And they actually just nerfed it yesterday by about 25% for the general AoE damage that it does. So with all of that, and hopefully with some tips from this guide, you should have no issues with this boss now at an 18 or even a 19 or a 20. And then finally, the last boss, Asaad. This boss, in my opinion, is a lot of fun. It's a perfect mix of mechanics that you need to sort of keep your brain on and keep focused to do, while also having a lot of AoE damage that is fun to heal, and that is also unavoidable for the group. And it's also a good DPS check for your DPS. It's a great all-around balance fight. Okay, with all of that, let's just jump right into the talents that I chose for this dungeon. So on the left side, the only real thing that I would note here is that you have Purge. This just helps on a few of the adds between the first and second boss. It's not necessary, but it does help, and I feel like on Fortified it may actually be necessary, just because the shields absorb a lot of damage, so it would add a lot of time to your dungeon. It also just gives you a little bit of leeway in case you miss some of the interrupts that also cause shields to happen. And I can't quite confirm this yet, but there may be shields that do damage if they end up being cast or something like that. So just, once again, I could be wrong there, I'm sorry, but just Purge, great to have for this dungeon. That being said, you do not need Poison Dispel, and you do not need Curse Dispel as well. Otherwise, I've gone pretty standard here. This is like your cookie cutter general, big healing Resto Shaman build. If you really wanted to, you could sacrifice Mana Spring, as well as points in either Swirling Currents or Surging Shields, and go down into Totemic Focus and Totemic Surge if you want to. You could even go further into Recall if you want to get rid of your Thundershock utility. Entirely up to you. That's one of the fun things about all of this stuff being new, is that like there's so many things that you can go with now. We're still trying to figure out exactly what is the best thing to do for each dungeon, but yeah, so this is what I would do on the left side. And then on the right side, just a quick note, I still have my DPS talents sacrificed as much as it pains me, because I do love doing DPS. But yeah, so no Stormkeeper, no Lava Surge. And the reason for this is that right now, with how generous the timers are in these dungeons, they're very easy to time if everybody can stay alive and if you can do the bosses correctly. So as a healer, especially at the beginning of a season, it's your job to get through all of those healing checks that they haven't nerfed yet. So very much so, go healing, don't go DPS unless you're super confident in yourself and you feel like you don't need the extra healing talents. That being said, with the sacrifices, so without Stormkeeper and Lava Surge, I've gone into Wave Speaker's Blessing, and I've also gone all the way down into the fully talented Primordial Wave, which is a big help on both the second and last boss for this place. And it's also going to be the playstyle that we're most likely going to be using with 4-set tier. So just, you should get used to using this. I also have sacrificed Manatide Totem and Spirit Walker's Tidal Totem. The damage profiles so far for these dungeons are not super bursty. They're more like rot based, and there's not like a lot of mechanics where, bosses all of a sudden just chunk you from 90% to 10% health. And that may be because we're not doing like 25s yet, but even so, that's a big difference in the damage profile I feel between Season 1 and Season 2, and that's the reason why I am no longer speccing into this talent, because to be honest, it wasn't super useful to begin with. It was very niche, but right now it doesn't, like the niche that it fills is not actually there in my opinion. So yeah, don't go this if you don't want to. Yeah, so just spec into this, and this once again, pretty average, pretty cookie cutter. This should help you clear not just this dungeon, but most of the bosses, or most of the dungeons this season. Okay, let's dive into the bosses then, I guess. If you have any questions about any of these talents or anything that I've mentioned so far, feel free to comment and I will hopefully get back to you. All right, let's begin with the first boss, which is Grand Vizier Ertan. This boss is pretty simple in nature, but it does hurt a lot. I tried this on a 19 as well, and the damage was pretty high. So just be careful of that and be ready for it. But otherwise, what you really need to do is dodge. This is basically a dodgeball fight. These little lightning balls are going to be traveling around the whole time. They have somewhat predictable movements. However, every so often they will like sort of just switch directions. So be aware of that. But you can kind of just watch where they're going and put yourself in good positions. Every so often he'll pull the tornadoes in like this, and then he's going to do a lot of AoE damage to the entire group. So this is what you want to save your AoE healing cooldowns for, such as Ancestral Guidance, Primordial Wave, Nature Swiftness, and Ascendance as well, and Healing Tide. And he basically just shifts between these two phases. So once again, really simple fight in nature, and it's easy to understand. It's just the damage does ramp up quite a bit when you get to the higher keys. One more thing to note that you may not know, because it pretty much you do this correctly even if you're not paying attention about it. The lurking Tempest ads are around the perimeters of the room. Those are the ones that you need to look at. If you don't look, they start casting something that I believe if it goes off, it kills somebody. So just have everybody stationed sort of around the circle, and that way you can make sure that everybody is looking at those lurking Tempests so that you don't have to worry about them. Okay, so for that second AoE phase, I actually didn't even need to use any cooldowns. Personally, this is not a fight where you need to use cooldowns, but that being said, there's no reason not to. So I'm sure for like the next tornado, I probably use an Ancestral Guidance or an Ascendance or something like that. Unless he's already dead by then, in which case I literally went through this whole fight without using any big cooldowns, which is fine. Once again, I actually think this boss is tuned fine. I think on higher keys, especially when you get really up there towards the end of the season, this boss is really going to hurt with these phases. Yeah, there you go. No cooldowns, just Primordial Wave, Nature Swiftness, and that's it. Once again, though, I don't advise you to not use cooldowns. It makes it easier. And if you're someone who's somewhat new to the class, don't hold your cooldowns. You should be using your cooldowns very often and as like literally as much as you can, because they make things easier. They allow you to DPS because they can heal while you're DPSing, all that stuff. But that being said, this boss, super easy in my opinion to understand and to do the mechanics. It's just going to be one of those bosses where the damage starts to get really chaotic, even a bit ridiculous once you get to really high keys. But with that being said, let's move on to the dragon, which is one of the more pain point bosses of the season so far. All right, let's jump right in. As you guys probably know by now, I have slowed down the boss encounter, so it's a little bit easier to follow. And I've also included an ability tracker in the top left so you guys can see what I'm casting and when. Because there's so much constant AoE damage going out here, you should be playing in this dungeon, I would say, Ancestral Reach instead of Flow of the Tides, so that you're not consuming your Riptides, as those will help you out in this fight with all the Wrath damage that's going out. So get your Riptides out. Use Primordial Wave pretty liberally. If you have continuous waves running, you'll have it on a 30-second cooldown, which is great. And then for these downbursts, this is probably the most difficult mechanic of the fight, as long as you can get the winds down. And the reason is that you can't really heal while you're traveling in the air. It counts as moving. So you really need to save things like Nature Swiftness, like what I just used right there. Healing Tide, maybe a personal defensive, healing potions. Anything that doesn't require a cast time is what you want to save for those phases. Another great cooldown here is Ascendance, because when you pop it, it gives a massive burst of healing to yourself and your group mates, and you don't need to be moving while you cast it. So that's perfect to use while you're in the middle of the air. Otherwise, you'll see I have a pretty standard rotation going here. I try to use Chain Heals when I have High Tide procced, but otherwise I'm just using Riptides, Healing Surges, and Primordial Waves. And that's pretty much enough to just keep the group alive. This is one of those fights where the goal is not necessarily to keep everybody at full health. There's no like massive burst of damage that you have to worry about that's gonna, chunk everybody down. It's really just steady raw damage. So as long as you're keeping everybody above around 50%, you should be good. And you'll actually see I did pop Ascendance there on that jump up, which is great. As always, I always advocate for this. If your first cooldown that you pop should usually be Ancestral Guidance, just because it is on the shorter timer, it allows you to use it, hopefully later in the fight as well, if the fight lasts that long. And you'll see there I popped my Trinket and my Racial as well. It's basically if you ever see yourself in a bit of a tight spot where people are getting a little bit lower than that 50% threshold, if you have any trinkets, racials, or anything extra, maybe you're using like the moat of sanctification trinket, that's the perfect time to pop those. And you'll see I try to save Slink for a bad situation. So because of this, like the nature of this boss is that sometimes you'll end up on the wrong side and you're far away. So you like right now actually, and you have to run very far away. So I actually put Slink on the correct side of the boss. So the people who have the haste buff can stand there and, you know, donate their health to us. And I also popped Astral Shift there as well. And somehow we got out of that situation because that was pretty bad positioning on my part and some of the other groups, just being so far away from the boss when the winds shifted. And thankfully, if you do have the game sound on, it does do like a little sort of like a drum sound. I don't know how to describe it, but there's a sound when the wind shifts, so just make sure you're listening for that. And if you're watching your frames, you can see it pretty immediately once you get the red or the green buff. So right here, I sort of tripped up. I thought I had the green buff, and then I sidestepped and got the red buff. And then when I went back to get the green buff, I ended up on the wrong side because I didn't realize the wind had switched. And in all of that chaos, of course, he did the downburst, and I was just not. that was not good play by me. So thankfully, we had a B-res, though, because we had played the rest of the fight correctly and properly. So, you know, there was no... As crappy as that was, there was no danger. We were pretty much good on this boss anyways. So anyways, this boss is a ton of fun. I'm a little bit sad that they nerfed it. Not that it didn't need a nerf. I just feel the nerf was a little bit too early, considering it's only like day 3 and we don't have any cure. We don't have tier sets or anything like that. I don't think it's a bad thing for a boss to be hard to heal through, or even, you know, necessarily impossible to heal through at certain key levels on the first week. But I mean, that's just my opinion. I know a lot of people disagree with that. So that being said, once again, you just, you know, now it's on a higher key, so this difficulty will probably be like a 20. So if you're doing this on an 18, it will probably be a little bit easier than what you saw here. Anyways, that being said, once again, that boss is a lot of fun. It takes a bit of practice. Like, don't be afraid to go and do this boss on a few lower keys. Get a rhythm down. Make sure you really understand the wind mechanic and where to stand. And it also really helps if you have group members who also understand the mechanic, because if they don't and they're standing on the wrong side, they're going to be taking more AoE damage the entire fight. They're also going to be doing less damage because their haste is down. It's just not good. So you definitely want to be playing with people who understand what they're doing here. Okay, and with that being said, let's move on to the next boss. All right, and going into the last boss. So this is Asaad. He's pretty tough, actually. It's a really fun boss, in my opinion. It's great mechanics. Very simple, easy to understand, but also very easy to screw up. We actually did this boss a few times. So we almost didn't time it. This was our last chance, and thankfully we got it down. This was actually my first or second time doing this boss, so it was a little bit of a learning curve. That being said, I actually found it really easy. It was the DPS who were sort of missing the static cling and then dying from that. So once we got that down, it was fine. That being said, there is a very handy weak aura. I generally don't use weak auras that much, but this one's pretty good. It just means that you don't have to target the boss the whole time to watch for the static cling. Maybe once you get used to the fight and you've done it a bit more, it's something that you could, you know, get rid of and just do with your brain, but there's no harm in just having something that sort of yells at you to jump. All right, this boss, not hard in theory, but hard in practice, just because the ad that does spawn needs to be killed right away, and they have a lot of health. I actually anticipate that this ad will get its health nerfed at some point. But while this ad is up, there is AoE damage that goes out, and it's pretty intense, especially for an 18. And I don't believe they have nerfed it yet, so yeah, this is going to be a very scary boss, I feel like, on higher keys. All right, hopefully the ad dies by now. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. But usually, like, at the end of the phase, the boss is going to cast this triangle. It's like a grounding triangle or something. And then he's going to do a cast called Supremacy. And if you're standing outside of this triangle, it's going to kill you. So it's pretty simple. Once you see the triangle start drawing, just go and stand in the middle so that, you know, you end up inside of the triangle when he completes it, not outside. And then you will survive that. It's pretty easy. And then it's just rinse and repeat. Otherwise, he also does that chain lightning. It's different than other chain lightnings in the game in the sense that it actually puts a big blue circle around you so you can see anybody who's standing in it. So if you see that blue circle, make sure if it's on you that you run out of the group. And if it's not on you, just make sure you're not standing in it. And also make sure that the person who is targeted with it gets a little bit of extra attention from you. This is a great spot to use Earth Shield. If you are spec'd into Earth and Harmony, your Earth Shield will carry a 6% damage reduction. So if you see someone get that Chain Lightning on them, the big blue circle, you can throw an Earth Shield on them and they'll take a little bit less damage, and it'll be a little bit easier to heal them up if you keep it on them for a second, because it also increases your healing. So what he does, he'll start the fight, he'll do one add, then he'll go into the grounding triangle phase, and then he'll do 2 adds, grounding triangle, 2 adds, grounding child, so on and so forth until you kill him. And yeah, I found the damage was not too bad to keep up with. You should be using your cooldowns as needed. Ancestral Guidance and Ascendance and Healing Tide are all great here. Spirit Link is also a great here. I would feel like it's one of the ones you want to save for when, you know, things aren't going so hot and you need like an oh crap button. But otherwise, we definitely have the tools to handle this. The only thing I would say is scary about this boss is that it's easy to run out of mana if you're being a little bit too crazy with your chain heals. And even if you're not, there's just so much healing going out that if this fight does last too long, it is going to be taxing for you. So just keep that aware, and make sure you bring mana pots and health pots for this boss as well. A health pot will help you in a pinch, and a mana pot will help you, last a little bit longer. If you can, try to get some DPS in on the boss and the ad. Just don't lose sight of that static cling. So if you're not using the weak aura, you probably should have Asaad targeted so that you can see when the static cling is going off. But if you do have the weak aura, it makes it a little bit easier for you to target the ad and help DPS that down. And then, sorry, I actually don't even think I mentioned what to do for the static cling. So when he casts the static cling, at the very end of the cast, you need to jump. So basically the mechanic is that you need to be in the air when he finishes that cast. The weak aura, I'll actually post the weak aura in the details of this YouTube video as well, so you can, just pull that if you need it. But anyways, it it plays a horn at you when you need to jump, and it displays it bigger on your screen. So once again, you don't actually have to target the boss. But yeah, as you'll see, I've kind of just gone through my cooldowns naturally as needed. This isn't a fight where I would say, plan to use a cooldown for every Nova. You could do that, but there are going to be some times where other DPS are using their healing cooldowns or using their defensives, and you may not need to use your healing cooldown. So this is a fight where I would recommend playing it by ear, and just watching your group. If people are starting to all get under 50% health, that's your cue to do, oh no, I need to pop Ancestral Guidance, I need to pop Ascendance, I need to pop whatever. But for me, I feel like this is a, look at the temperature of the room and then use your cooldowns based on that. That being said, totally can plan out your cooldowns if you want. It just doesn't leave a lot of room for if things go wrong, in a spot where you didn't plan for it. As always, though, I can't recommend this enough. I hopefully say it in all of my videos. When you're doing your healing cooldowns for any boss that has a lot of AoE damage phases, always start with Ancestral Guidance, because once again, it has the lowest cooldown and it will be up towards the end of the fight. And you can always count on that. Even for some of the really long fights when the keys get up there, like I remember Tyr and Maruk, like if you're doing like a 5-6 minute fight, you can even sometimes get 3 uses out of it, which is pretty awesome. All right, I think this is our last ad. This is also a boss where you probably don't want to just commit to the boss unless he's under like 5%. Anything over that, you probably want to kill the ad. It would be very tragic to die to rot damage when the boss is sub 10% just because you decided to focus the boss and not the ad. So you'll see there, someone actually got hit by the static cling. They didn't jump in time. I think even after we killed the boss, they said they were sort of tunneling and just weren't paying attention. From my experience with this boss, like I said, we actually did this a few times before we got it down. From my experience, what's really annoying about this boss is if you or a DPS sort of stops paying attention for even a second and he does that static cling, it puts a dot on you. So we can dispel it pretty quickly with our magic dispel, which is great. But if somebody is already low from the ad damage or from, the chain lightning or whatever, the static cling will kill them like it did for that guy. So just be aware of that. But hopefully everybody, like, that is technically a mechanic that you should never have to deal with, because there's never a situation in which people will not be able to jump in this fight. It's not like he attaches you to the ground at any point. So hopefully you never have to deal with that. But But yeah, that's that. That was all 3 bosses for this dungeon. This is only an 18. I don't say only an 18. I know 18s are somewhat tough right now. But you know, expect once we start getting into the 23s, the 24s, that I will probably redo these guides, because the way you have to handle the mechanics sometimes changes when the damage profiles change and increase with the key scaling. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this guide. I really hope you're enjoying the season so far. I really like it. I think I really enjoyed season 1, but I think season 2 is also filled with some great dungeons, some really challenging fights. And I'm actually stoked to see what Fortified has in store for us next week, because some of these dungeons have crazy trash. But yeah, with that being said, enjoy yourselves, and I will see you next time.